Welcome. My name is Kirsta Coates, and I'm the Senior Product Marketing Manager here at Decision Lens. I have the privilege of hosting today's Innovator Spotlight, and we have a very fascinating topic for you today. Our speaker today is Jacob Goodwin from the Digital Manufacturing and Design Innovation Institute. It's quite a mouthful there, but it's often referred to as DMDII. Jacob is going to discuss how innovations in digital design and analytics will transform American manufacturing. He'll also give us an insider's view of DMDII's Digital Lab for Manufacturing. And he'll talk about its background, its mission, and its 3 inaugural projects. Now, a few logistics before we get started. We're aiming for 45 minutes for today's webcast. We have all the phones muted for the benefit of our speaker, but we do want to hear from you. So at any time during the call, please send us your questions, send us your thoughts. Just use the WebEx chat feature, look for Maddie, and send your ideas along, and we'll address as many of those as possible towards the end of the call. All right. Well, we couldn't have chosen a better time to spotlight manufacturing innovation. R&D innovation investment is spurring the fastest growth in manufacturing since 1993. The chart you see here focuses on roughly the last decade, and the trend is clear. Look at that, $202 billion spent in 2012 versus $126 billion in 2000. Just phenomenal growth. And a major catalyst for that growth is digital. I've highlighted 3 themes from the White House's June 2014 report on manufacturing innovation. It's a great report. I really recommend it. The first theme there is digital design, one of the major catalysts. So every day our news feeds are overflowing with articles about the advances of 3D printing, crowdsourcing, rapid prototyping. And the impact has been faster iterations in manufacturing, reduced waste, and frankly, more sophisticated designs. That second theme, digital manufacturing, it really talks about the wave of new technology aimed at reducing the time that's required to go to design, to test, and produce new products, really shortening the product life cycle, which leads to greater profits. And finally, probably the underpinnings of both of these, the third theme of big data. More than ever, analytics are being shared between design and production and all throughout the supply chain, ultimately leading to lower costs and better products. So the future of manufacturing R&D is absolutely bright. But we'd be negligent if we didn't qualify this with one caveat, and that's the fact that there's a lot of risk baked into these projections. Now, all of you on the phone, you already know this, but the stakes for R&D and innovation programs are high. The figures on this slide really attest to that. Look at that, 66% of new products fail within the first 2 years. And then 96% of all innovations fail to return their cost of capital. We're not talking chump change here. And in certain industries, hundreds of millions of dollars are at stake. And very few organizations can sustain this magnitude of loss. So why is this happening? One reason is a lack of prioritization. This graphic from Booz & Company shows the various solutions that the market is investing in to support innovation. You can see the categories along the bottom of the screen there. The tools are categorized into customer insight, ideation, development, launch innovations, etc. You see tools to help gather customer preferences. There are tools for simulation, CAD applications, and then further down at launch, there's even tools to automate marketing and customer feedback. But there's a big, expensive hole between ideation and development. How are the companies intelligently and strategically evaluating their innovation portfolio to elevate the ideas that truly resonate in the marketplace? How are they assessing their R&D investment portfolios against their organizational priorities to make sure that there's alignment? And do they really have a clear view on return on investment? That's the level of insight that Decision Lens clients have. Decision Lens is an R&D software solution for strategic prioritization and resource optimization. Our analytics and visualizations really empower our clients to prioritize their innovation investments and optimally allocate their R&D resources to the programs that actually produce results. Here are just a few of the world-class commercial and public sector organizations that use our solutions, and we love to bring them the freshest ideas and the best thought leadership in R&D and innovation, which really brings us to today's guest. It's our pleasure to introduce you to Jacob Goodwin. He's the Director of Membership Engagement and Communications at DMDII. And Jacob is responsible for recruiting elite industry and academic partners to collaborate on innovations in digital manufacturing and design. Prior to joining DMDII, Jacob served for more than a decade as the editor-in-chief of Government Security News. He's also author of Brotherhood of Arms, General Dynamics, and the Business of Defending America. Now it's published by Random House. And he's had an illustrious career working with enterprises in the defense, telecommunications, and security sectors. So we're really excited to hear about the Digital Lab for Manufacturing today, and thank you very much for joining us today, Jacob. I'm going to turn the floor over to you, and you can just let me know when you'd like to advance the slides.
Thank you very much, Tirsa. That was a terrific setting of the context for this discussion, and I also appreciate the very kind words in introducing me. It's the first time I've heard my career described as illustrious, so it's a nice phrase I'll remember. Welcome to everybody. I hope I can provide some information in the next 20 or 25 minutes. I'm certainly open to your questions at the end of my talk. Hopefully the questions are pointed and tough, and we'll see if I can wrestle with them. What I'm going to try to do today in the few minutes that I have is describe how we got to a Digital Manufacturing and Design Innovation Institute, what its purpose is, how we're getting ourselves set up, what we've already accomplished, and what our goals are for the future. And here's how I tell the story. Essentially, the Obama administration, looking over the economic landscape over the last 4, 5, 6 years, has reached the same conclusion that millions of Americans have reached over the last couple of decades, which is that we are clearly losing our edge here in America in manufacturing. That where coming out of the Second World War, America was the predominant manufacturer. Our factories were producing the largest number of the most highest quality, largest quantity of products in the world, and we were at the top of the heap. Since about 1978 or 80, or certainly through the 80s, 90s, and into the current century, we've seen a dramatic decline in the absolute numbers of manufacturing taking place in the United States. Manufacturing jobs themselves, by the way, Tirsa, if you would advance the slide, I'd appreciate it. Manufacturing jobs themselves have dropped since 1978 from something like 20 million U.S. manufacturing jobs down to 12 million. And the trend line of jobs and manufacturing projects being outsourced overseas is happening at an alarming pace. The Obama administration looked at this situation, set up a number of advisory committees in 2012 and 2013. They came in with recommendations, and essentially the administration decided that if it was going to tackle this question of decline in U.S. manufacturing, it ought to do so by setting up a series of institutes whose purpose would be niche by niche by niche to identify problem areas in specific niches, what research would have the biggest bang for the buck, what research projects should be established and funded, and then to oversee the actual implementation of those R&D projects with the notion of coming up with solutions that could not only be derived, but more importantly, could be disseminated across the factories throughout the country. When President Obama, in February of 2014, and this is the picture you're looking at, is the actual ceremony in the White House on February 2014, when he announced the establishment of the Digital Manufacturing and Design Innovation Institute, we became the fourth institute in the United States with its own unique niche. There already had been an institute you may have heard of. It's now called America Makes, which is looking at the opportunities that exist in what's called additive manufacturing, also better known as 3D printing. That's based in Youngstown, Ohio. There's another one of these institutes that's now been established in Detroit, involved in lightweight metals, and a third institute that's been established in North Carolina, which is looking at advances in energy systems and particularly high-tech batteries, more efficient, more powerful, longer-lasting high-tech batteries. We are the fourth institute, and perhaps in some sense the most important of the institutes. I know that sounds self-serving, but most important in the sense that our topic covers the entire waterfront of manufacturing. And you'll get that sense when I describe what it is we do. A lot of people misunderstand what digital manufacturing actually means. Some people think it means robots. Other people think it means 3D printing. That's not what we or the president or the administration or our partners think of when we think of digital manufacturing. Tirsa, if you'd advance the slide, please. If you look across the history, and I'll go through this real quick, the problems that have existed that we are now trying to address, I've made reference to, and that is the outsourcing of manufacturing jobs, the barriers to sharing data, et cetera. Next slide, please. Let's catch up with where I am. Next slide. There we go. Essentially, let me describe what digital manufacturing is. We think of digital manufacturing as the intelligent, efficient use of data derived at every stage of the manufacturing process. Tons of data is generated at the design stage, at the prototype stage, at the production stage, at the quality stage, at the inspection stage, and then when products get shipped out the back door during their lifetime, and then ultimately in the destruction phase. Unfortunately, much of this data is not captured and most of the data is not analyzed in ways that can help speed up the manufacturing process. We think of digital manufacturing as the intelligent capturing and analysis of data at every stage of production so that products can be built faster, cheaper, and be brought to market quicker, all with an eye to being more competitive with those factories and those nations that have been beating our brains in recent years. You know, in many ways, manufacturing has moved to Asia and particularly to China on the basis of low wage rates that have been offered in factories over in Asia and China. Essentially, the Obama administration and the leaders of U.S. manufacturing have come to realize that if we're going to compete with low wage rates, we have to bring American innovation and American know-how back to the process and find ways in and of itself to make this process more effective and more efficient. When we talk about using data at every stage of production, what do we mean? There's about 4 or 5 discrete areas that I want to describe real quick before I get into the structure of DMDII. And these are just 4 or 5 representative concepts of digital data. There are others that will evolve over the years. One concept of digital data is what we refer to as the digital thread, essentially using data more effectively as products move down the production process. For example, let's just imagine that the pen that you're holding in your hand right now, probably most of you, let's imagine that somebody had to design the cap on that pen and sat somewhere in Detroit at a CAD machine and spent 2 weeks designing and building the technical data package for the cap on that pen, showing its dimensions, showing its materials, showing its strength, showing the angles, showing the threads on the inner side of the cap, et cetera, and might have spent quite a bit of time building that technical data package. In an ideal world, he or she would be able to push the button on their CAD machine, send the complete technical data package across the country to Phoenix, Arizona, where the prototype manufacturer who was going to build small test quantities of that pen cap, build 100 copies of the pen cap. Ideally, that data package would be sent at an instant and could be openable on the machine for the prototype manufacturer. Unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. Oftentimes, the two systems can't communicate. They're not operating on common standards. The software doesn't speak the same language. And when the fellow sitting in Phoenix, Arizona goes to open the technical data package, either it doesn't open at all, or it's limited data, or he doesn't see everything. And then when he actually looks at it and has spent more time trying to deal with the data than he should, if he wants to make changes to the design of that cap and go back upstream, back to the the designer, the feedback loops are often inefficient and are filled with obstacles such that it's hard to communicate back up the line. And so a process that should take an hour or two, or perhaps a day or two, instead consumes weeks of time and costs lots of money to move the data from the design stage to the prototype stage. Similarly, if and when the prototype manufacturer is ready to lock in his design and send it to the production manufacturer, let's say sitting in Cleveland, Ohio, ideally that would happen at the push of a button, and the CNC machine that would be making that pen cap would be able to read the design from the prototype manufacturer easily, completely, without any problem. But unfortunately, it doesn't happen that way because there are so many brand name CNC machines, each operating on proprietary software. Oftentimes, the system on which that pen cap will be produced in quantity can't read the design, and instead he's got to go back to the prototype designer and say, please reduce this to a blueprint, FedEx it to me, send it through the mail. It's got to be reduced to writing before more time and money is spent by the manufacturer to rebuild the design. You get the point. I could continue. But one of the big problems that exist in manufacturing is the inability to move data smoothly down each of these stages of production. That's one realm in which our group is going to tackle, try to find solutions to some of the hurdles that we have to clear, and after solving the problem, try and share the tools and share the lessons learned with companies large and small across the country. That's one realm. A second realm is what we refer to as, you might move a slide or two forward, Tirsa, just so we can, hang on there, and I'll get to that slide in a moment. A second realm in which DMDII will be operating is what is known as intelligent machining. And essentially that's now confined to a single piece of manufacturing equipment where if we had our act together, we could put multiple sensors on a piece of CNC equipment. Those sensors would monitor the machine as it's functioning in real time, capturing data, say, about the temperatures at which the machine is operating, the rate of speed at which it's producing parts, the rate at which it's going out of tolerance, the water that's being used or the oil that's being used to lubricate the process as it's happening. And by capturing large amounts of data and analyzing it in real time, we might be able to adjust the machine as it's functioning in order to get more efficiency and produce parts faster, quicker, and cheaper if we use the data properly. A third example, and then I'm going to come to the structure of DMDII. A third example of what we think of as digital manufacturing is what we call advanced analytics. And now essentially you're talking about capturing mountains of data from thousands of machines over tens of years in order to, and this is essentially what Tirsa was referring to as the big data aspect of it. You're now capturing massive amounts of manufacturing data, which would enable you to determine, for example, if you capture massive amounts of data about automobiles produced and driven over 10 years, you can see where the imperfections are in the automobiles themselves. Maybe the carburetors are burning out faster than they should, and you can backtrack back to the production process of those carburetors and look for the cause of the problem that you discovered by looking at massive amounts of data over a long period of time. That's known as advanced analytics. A fourth realm in which DMDII will become active is the cybersecurity protection of factory machines connected to the internet and operating on the factory floor. We're all familiar with the notion that our laptops or our computers or any of our business systems are vulnerable to cyber attacks. Our institute will be looking at cyber attacks on one unique class of objects, which is equipment on a factory floor, which oftentimes is connected to the internet, so the results and the reports can be sent back to headquarters. But by virtue of being connected to the internet, they also are vulnerable to hacking. Our institute does not feel as though we can take on the whole field of cybersecurity. There are thousands of organizations and institutes that are studying cybersecurity, but we feel best capable of taking on the question of cyber attacks on factory machines. So that's another area in which we're going to define R&D projects and look to solve some big problems. Let me talk now about what is it we're actually doing. At the time the Obama administration announced the formation of DMDII, it said we're going to fund this institute with $70 million in federal money, which could be spent over a 5-year period, roughly $14 or $15 million per year, all devoted to R&D projects in the field of digital manufacturing, as I've just explained it to you, on the presumption that our $70 million in federal funds would be matched dollar for dollar equally by the industrial and academic teams that get set up to do the research itself. So, for example, let me give you an example. We have some major partners who have already signed up and joined DMDII to tackle these big national problems. On the corporate side, we're very pleased to welcome to our campaign here a dozen firms that we consider Tier 1 and Tier 2 corporate industry partners. And just to give you a flavor of this, I'll rattle off our Tier 1 partners, the 6 Tier 1 partners. They include Lockheed Martin, General Electric, Siemens, Dow Chemical, Rolls-Royce, and Procter & Gamble. Some of the biggest companies in the world, some of the best manufacturing systems integrator OEMs in the world are part of our institute aimed at solving the problems that they know they can't solve alone. They believe they can solve by collaborating not only with some of their competitors, but also with some of the best brains in academia. In addition to the 12 Tier 1 and Tier 2 corporate partners that we've identified, we have also signed up more than a dozen major academic institutions like the University of Wisconsin at Madison, the University of Louisville, Purdue University, the University of Illinois at Champaign-Urbana, the University of Chicago, Northwestern University, Rochester Institute of Technology, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So here's how we do it. The federal government says we will give you $70 million if each project, the amount of money that the federal government is devoting to each project is matched by the team that wins the project. So let's say, for example, we pull together a large number of partners, both industry partners and academic partners. Some of the best brains representing those institutions come together in what we call our Technical Advisory Committee, which literally gets together and tries to identify areas of digital manufacturing that provide the best likelihood of a return on the investment, of the biggest bang for the buck, and the type of problems that can't be solved by an individual organization but really needs to be solved by multiple partners speaking for a broader sector of the manufacturing space. The Technical Advisory Committee will look at a number of options, will determine the priorities, and will ultimately pick specific projects, R&D projects, that it wants to launch and fund and set up competitions. The partners themselves, both corporate partners and academic partners, form teams to compete for that work that's announced by us. For example, let's just imagine, this is all hypothetical, let's imagine that our Technical Advisory Committee determines that there could be great advances in intelligent machining if we had a better fix on what type of sensors should go on a piece of CNC equipment and how can we better analyze the data that comes from that expanded number of sensors. Let's say that was the subject of some research. Let's further imagine that Lockheed Martin heads one team, and the team includes Lockheed Martin, a software company that's used to crunching the data that comes from those type of sensors, a professor from Purdue University and another professor from University of Illinois. That's the Lockheed Martin team. let's say they determine that it'll take them 2 years and $4 million to undertake the scope of work that our institute defines. Our technical advisory committee writes the specifications, issues the solicitation, and tasks the winner to do a piece of work. It's up now to the Lockheed Martin team to build the resources internally and submit the best proposal. It might very well be up against another team led by Boeing with some other software companies and some other university faculty members. Our institute determines who submits the best, most effective, most likely to succeed proposal in an aspect of the problem that is most compelling and awards the contract to the Lockheed team. As I said earlier, $2 million of that $4 million project will come from DMDII, originating with the federal government. The other $2 million will come from the team members themselves, who have to come up with a matching $2 million to the federal-funded $2 million. Let me tell you where we're at and give you an indication of the types of involvement we're looking for from the industry partners and the university partners. We started in February. We are already launched and underway in defining projects and in preparing to announce new projects. Last month, we issued the first 3 project calls for the first 2 project calls for the first 2 projects. Interestingly enough, the day after DMDII was announced, a separate government agency known as DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, DARPA, came to us and said, hey, we've been funding for the last 3 or 4 years a program designed to create manufacturing software tools that would help in the very way I've described, that will help collect and crunch the data picked up at various stages of the manufacturing process as it relates to military vehicles. This program was known as the Adaptive Vehicle Make Program, or AVM. And they said, if you guys take over this project and issue additional solicitations for further R&D work, pushing the AVM program closer and closer towards commercialization, we will provide $10 million to use for the funding of this R&D. And so literally the first 2 projects that we issued were projects based on the work that DARPA had already done and asking us to pursue that research and development forward. That was last month. We've received more than a dozen submissions, and we're now evaluating them. Where we are now is we're about to launch our second wave of projects. These will be discussed at a public workshop here in Chicago. We are based in Chicago, Illinois, here in Chicago on Friday, September 26th, in which we now will put out descriptions of 3 more R&D projects, each in the sweet spot that we've already announced and upon which we won the original funding. One of them is that area I described known as the Advanced Manufacturing Enterprise, essentially tying the production stages together. The buzzword that you often hear is the digital thread. It's the digital thread that ties digital data together at every stage of production. One of our projects will be looking for further research to advance the field of advanced manufacturing enterprise. A second of the projects that will be discussed publicly on the 26th will be intelligent machining, as I've described, using sensor data on a specific machine in real time to adjust its processes. And the third area that will be described at the public meeting on the 26th will be advanced analytics, essentially crunching big data captured over many years in order to arrive at big conclusions that can be fed back into the manufacturing process. So the next wave of our projects will be these 3 programs that we will announce. It is our intention, we'll have many of our partners, something like 30 or 40 or 50 companies in the room and 20 or 30 universities in the room. We expect close to 200 people on the 26th. it is our hope that out of that group we'll form a number of teams to tackle each and every one of the three projects, and we'll get some darn good proposals, which we'll evaluate carefully with our government friends and ultimately award those projects as well. In addition to our main mission, which is to bring together the best brains in industry and academia to identify problem areas in digital manufacturing that lend themselves to positive solutions, and then overseeing the research and providing the funding, as I've described. In addition to that whole realm of overseeing R&D, we also have the mission to disseminate the lessons learned across tens of thousands of factories in the United States so that they, in turn, benefit by the research. We're not looking just to perform research for the fun of it or for our own pleasure. We're looking to make real breakthroughs that can be disseminated and executed down at the factory level at every factory in the United States, and really moving the culture forward so that American factories can produce faster, smarter, cheaper, be more competitive with some of our competitive nations, particularly in Asia, particularly in China, in order to bring jobs back to the United States. So there is the question. Yes.
While you're on that topic, I want to, because there are questions coming in, and since you're on that topic, one question that just came in, and these actually a couple of them I kind of synthesized into this one. People want to know what are some of the methods and tactics that the participants, the universities, the research institutes, the corporations are taking to adopt the technologies they're actually designing together. How does that work?
Well, it's a great question, and it's part of our mission, but it's not yet happening. Think of it this way. We were established in February. We are right now in the process of launching our very first project calls and receiving submissions so that the winners of our very first projects have not even been announced yet, let alone have not begun their research. So while we're moving forward on all three fronts, I was going to add the third front, which is educating the workforce that will need to understand what is digital manufacturing in order to hold the jobs in the future that require those skills. That's a third element that our institute needs to tackle. The essential answer to your question, Tirsa, is we need to devise nationwide methods of getting the word out in the form of curriculum, in the form of coursework at the high school level, at the college level, at the community college level, the vocational schools, training for professionals in the mid-career. We will be working with lots of academic institutions, A, to develop the curriculum, and B, to use the networks and the organizations they already have in place to communicate these lessons learned. It's a big task. We're only tiptoeing up to the starting point. We literally welcome everybody who's got bright ideas on how to develop the curriculum, in what format. Is it video? Is it coursework? Is it classroom lectures? Is it by TV? Is it webinars like this one? You know, ideas on the best way to disseminate the lessons learned. All of that remains to be coordinated and conceived, and we're just at the start of doing so. I should probably wrap it up. I'm obviously at a disadvantage because I don't even see where the slides are, but let's assume from your point of view, Tirsa, you're finished. I could rattle on for an hour, but I think it's best if I open it up for questions. So why don't I say, fire away. Ask me any questions that you've seen come in.
Okay, great. So, no, this has been a great overview. I think we got an exclusive preview of what the Obama administration had in mind for that digital thread. Another question that's coming, it's a little bit related to what you were just touching on, is, well, you mentioned earlier that there is a governance body that kind of selects the projects that are going to be worked on. Someone wants to know who's involved in the project selection process for DMDII, and what are the selection criteria that are leveraged for that decision making?
Great question. And let me take you right into the process. And the process is designed to not only be intelligent and thoughtful, but also honest and balanced and objective, not tilted in one direction or another. Our claim to fame will be establishing procedures and processes that are honest and fair and open and transparent. Let me describe the process. Essentially, we have already established a provisional technical advisory committee. That provisional committee will become formalized once the dozens of members and ultimately hundreds of members sign the official paperwork and become official partners of DMDII. That process of them signing the paperwork is happening as we speak. But even before they have become official members, we've established a provisional technical advisory committee. And each of our prospective partners who pledged their support during the stage when DMDII and its parent organization, known as UI Labs, even during our proposal phase, when we submitted our proposal in a nationwide competition back in 2013, we were one of 5 collaborations that were pursuing this work. Other proposals were submitted by a team based in Massachusetts surrounding MIT. Another one came out of Huntsville, Alabama, with a lot of Southern partners. There was a Southern California proposal, and there was a Northern California proposal. Ours was a Chicago Midwest-based proposal. Ultimately, the U.S. Army, which evaluated the 5 proposals, chose us as the winner, and that's how DMDII got started. But from the days when we had partners who were signed on as our proposal partners, dozens of companies and dozens of universities who had pledged more than $250 million in support of that matching money that I described earlier, we came in with an overwhelming amount of support and resources. When the time came to set up our provisional technical advisory committee, we looked for representatives to be sent from all of those organizations that I've described. So Lockheed sent people, General Electric sent people, Siemens, Microsoft, PARC, Dow Chemical, John Deere, Caterpillar, and on and on. Each of these people have essentially sent their smartest manufacturing/digital manufacturing experts, whether they were head of global manufacturing or the director of engineering or the director of digital manufacturing. Basically, the best brains in each of these companies as it relates to digital manufacturing comes periodically to Chicago. I've been in the room with 60 or 70 of these folks, and they will spend a day or two looking at hundreds of prospective problems, prioritizing them in an open and transparent way, and ultimately saying, of the 100 possibilities, we consider these 3 are the juiciest project areas for research to take place. And so those 3 projects will then be detailed, be described, be put out on the public platform so that the various partners can team up in various teams and submit proposals. And members of this technical advisory committee, none of whom have submitted proposals, there is no conflict of interest here. We're taking strong steps to avoid that. But the technical advisory committee will serve in part as evaluators, and there are outside members who have nothing to do with DMDII. Often government representatives and other experts be brought in as part of the evaluation team. And so the evaluation process is done in a fair and open way, ultimately picking the best proposals from the ideas that were determined by the Technical Advisory Committee to have the biggest bang for the buck.
Well, that's a lot of brain power you bring into the table. So I think that it probably addressed quite a few questions that came in. We're going to be respectful of everybody's time. We promised we would kind of wrap up within 45 minutes, and I think that we had a great, rich conversation, and it could go on, actually. Any questions that are outstanding, please send them, and we will definitely forward them to Jacob to follow up with you directly. If you'd like to know more about all the thought leadership we're presenting in terms of innovation, strategic prioritization, and resource planning, we have several other resources for you. We welcome you all to visit the web. Visit innovation.decisionlens.com. That's our hub for R&D, manufacturing, and new product development portfolio leaders. And capitalassets.decisionlens.com is also where you can find more resources on optimal capital planning. We invite you to join our next webcast on October 16th, where we're talking about evaluating the risk and reward in innovation projects. It should be a very fascinating topic. And then finally, for some of you who have asked this question as well during the webcast, if you want to join continue this conversation and continue talking about best practices and innovations that we're talking about now with Jacob, feel free to join Leaders in R&D Portfolio Strategy or Leaders in Capital Planning on LinkedIn, and we can continue the conversation there. Jacob, we cannot thank you enough for just giving us such a deep dive into the work of the Digital Lab for Manufacturing and DMDII, and really how we're helping to advance, the country with some of the important work that you're doing there. So thank you very much for joining us. It's been a pleasure to host you.
Well, I appreciate it very much. It's a great opportunity to get our message out. Would it be okay if I gave my email address and invite any of your listeners and participants to reach out to me if they're interested in further information?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Folks, I am very open to any of your ideas or your interest in joining DMDII, which is truly a campaign to revolutionize American manufacturing and make us competitive once again. My email address is Jacob, that's JACOB .Goodwin, GOODWIN at UILabs with an S, UILabs.org. Please reach out to me. Let me know your interest. Describe your organization, your company, your academic institution, and we'll take it from there, and I would welcome your participation. Thanks, Tirsa, very, very much.
Thank you, and thank you all for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you again next month. Have a great day.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye now.